Hello and welcome to another video in the Tal series. We're looking at games played by Mikhail, who was at one point the world champion in chess and had a very peculiar style, extremely aggressive, very tactical, loved to sacrifice things. And as much as I admire his style of play, I'm learning, at least at this point in my development, that I think my style of play is basically the opposite to his. Nevertheless, I think I can learn a lot from him and I enjoy watching his games. So, with that said, we're going to go through this game early in his career, back in 1952, where he had the white pieces against someone called Classop. Now, in this game, Tal opened d4, and Classop immediately plays something a bit offbeat, this f5 idea. Now, if this were me, I'd be pretty happy to see this. It's possible I would play what Tal played, which is e4, but considering that gives Classop the option to simply take the pawn, I think I probably would have first started with c4, a little bit more normal. Maybe try and put my knight on c3 and then in future play this. I wouldn't have been in a rush to play that. But Tal, he says, I want you to take my pawn so that I can develop my knight with a tempo against your pawn. Now, this idea here of d5 to defend the pawn doesn't work. You can't take the pawn straight away because, of course, it's defended by the queen, but you can provide a check, and then your queen will participate in the attacking of the pawn. So that's fine, but again, this is not the way I would play. Classop just developed his own knight defending the pawn. That's another way to defend the pawn, and it's very sound. There's now no checks available here. What do? Well, Tal, in his own style, offers basically take another pawn and I'll develop my knight. And Classop says, no, I don't want to take another pawn and give you the development of the knight. I'm just going to put some pawns in the center now. And Tal decides to take. And after takes back, since he can't put his knight somewhere particularly good, he's probably going to have to end up putting it on e2. He doesn't want to block in his bishop, so instead he plays this move, bishop c4. And on the next move, he puts the knight on e2. After Black develops to c6 with the knight, he castles. And then after e6, Tal plays the bishop move again to b5. So Tal here he's done a lot of things I wouldn't typically do. One is that he's played in a very aggressive way, handing pawns over willy-nilly. He's moved the bishop twice in the opening. And in general, he really just hasn't been playing very well objectively. After a6, he drops the bishop back. And when the queen moves in, he develops the other bishop, which he says is his own annotations. He should have done this earlier. Instead of putting the bishop to c4 and then b5, he should have gone to b5 immediately. And then he would have been able to play this a move earlier, and all of that would have been better. But what he's done is kind of odd and objectively bad. Black is definitely winning. Here, Tal does take a moment to get his king off this potentially open diagonal. And after the play continues, Tal decides he wants to give up yet another pawn for a particular purpose. And that purpose is he wants to try and break up the kingside pawns. That's what he's trying to do here. Now, after the capture of the pawn, you can say, well, how did he break up the kingside pawns? Well, I suppose he hasn't. But after he takes here, if the queen captures, then it loses sight of the bishop here, and Tal would be able to take the bishop. So therefore, after the capture, Black now has to take with the pawn, and the kingside pawns are ruined. Nonetheless, Black still in an absolutely dominating position. And that's partly because of these very active bishops versus these much less active knights, and also partly because if you count up the material, Black has more of it. Here we have the bishop attacking the queen, so the queen steps up out of damage, out of harm's way. Now Black also brings their queen a bit closer to the center. Tal now plays this move. He's trying to hope, in his own words, that on the next move he might be able to play the knight here, and then both knights together will be able to blockade on the c5 square. That's what he's hoping for. He doesn't really have anything better because of the way he's played. He's just a lot worse, like lots worse. And black says, well, no, I'm just going to play c5 right now, so you're never going to get your knight here and then over here, because this move is already in play. So Tal says, all right, well, let me kick your bishop away. And black says, all right, I'll move my bishop. You know what? No, I'm not going to move my bishop anywhere. I'm going to play h5. And if you take my bishop, I'm going to mate you very shortly. Like this, check, king has to move. Here's another check, king has to move. Another check, the hunt goes on. And before long, we have checkmate. So black says, no, I'm not moving my bishop. I'm not moving my bishop at all. I'm just going to play this move instead, and you're not going to take my bishop. Tal says, yeah, you're right. I'm not going to take your bishop. I'll jump my knight up here and see what happens next. Black continues the onslaught. Now, at this point, if you do turn on the computer evaluation, it is approximately like -6. That's how much black is crushing. -4, -5. You know, -6. Yeah, it's a big advantage here to black. Tal is getting smashed. He takes the pawn, falling into this fork, and then he obviously saves his queen, giving up the knight, but gaining some initiative up here with his check, forcing the king to move, retreating the knight with an attack against the queen, and when the queen moves, bringing in another check, which relies on this pin, so the knight can't be taken. Now when the king moves, he simply collects the pawn with a tempo on the queen. Now, if the queen takes the pawn here, white can get quite active after a move like this, bringing the knight back to attack the queen, and when the queen moves, just taking the bishop and then taking a pawn. Here, white is basically all good. And this goes to show that the complexity of the situation that can arise in a chess game is such that even when the evaluation is very heavily in one side's favor, one simple wrong step can drastically change and completely reverse the fortunes of both players. So that's basically what Tal was relying on in this game. It wasn't fundamental good chess, although of course I'm not saying he's not playing well. He would obviously beat me any day of the week. But what I'm saying is he's created a scenario that's so complicated that he's banking on his opponent making a mistake. If his opponent doesn't make a mistake, he's dead. He's banking on his opponent making a mistake. And of course, there's that famous quote of Tal that he says he wants to take his opponent into a deep, dark forest where 2 + 2 = 5, and where the escape is only big enough for one. So that's really what he's banking on in this, even though he's doing a lot worse than his opponent, which is not my style. I actually want to be I don't want to necessarily objectively be better, but I definitely want to be, if I'm objectively worse, I don't want to be much worse at all. I just want to have comfortable positions if I can. So anyway, black didn't take this pawn, they retreated the queen. Now Tal brings the knight back, hitting the queen again, which now jumps back here. Now in this position, if you're trying to be solid, I would think this queen's pretty much out of play. Why not bring it back towards the center, give a check, and try and consolidate things, which the computer says is one of the best moves. And basically at this point it's equal, because this queen g3 move was one of those mistakes. But Tal continues with this checking idea, which is actually, again, objectively much worse, and now again black has a large advantage. He continues trying to chase black's queen before taking this pawn, and now moves his king out of the way so that this pin doesn't exist, and therefore he is actually threatening to take this bishop. For that reason, now the bishop does move. Tal continues to harass the queen, supported by his own queen. When the queen moves, he solidifies the rooks on the same file, and then continues to harass the queen, and it kind of looks like white has a lot of initiative. Maybe white's even better, but objectively, again, white is a lot worse. After the check, the king moves out of the way. The queen comes over to d5, basically saying that if this rook moves off this file, the knight is going to fall. Well, Tal moves his rook over here, producing some possible threats on the g7 square in future. And black puts a bishop right in the road, basically indirectly defending this g7 point. Now, Tal takes a bishop, very nice move, again relying on a pin, but giving up the knight. Then he comes back, and here Tal takes the pawn, which seems like a crazy move. Like, why are you taking this pawn? It can be captured in many ways. Of course, if it's taken like this, well, there's going to be a checkmate. So he's not going to take with the bishop, but he can take with the king. And what's the big idea? Well, the big idea for Tal is that he takes the pawn here. And in his annotations, Tal was very happy with this. He was saying, basically here the only move that black can do is this, and there things still remain pretty difficult for white, and objectively it's even. But when you turn the computer analysis on, Tal was dead wrong. He wasn't winning here. He wasn't even here. Black is still crushing. He just has to find this move, going for a queen trade. If we try and avoid the queen trade with a check, well, the king moves out of the way. You can give another check and try and pick up this bishop. But there's going to be a queen trade coming. You can't avoid it. Once those queens are off the board, you're just basically down a rook. Tal is a lot worse, and I guess what I've found out in this game is that I should back my own personality, my own playing style, which, as much as I admire Tal and love watching his games, as I think so many people do, in a way I'm learning what not to do, in a way. But I'm also learning that the complexity of situations is so high that the probability of players making mistakes, even when they are objectively crushing, is really high. Which is why if I can produce for myself relatively comfortable positions and positions which are relatively uncomfortable for my opponents, even if they are objectively a bit better, even a lot better, the probability is that they will go wrong at some point. And that's what happened in this game. Not that Tal was objectively great, but that his strategy of hoping that his opponent would go wrong eventually did pay off. And when it did, he essentially just had a whole bunch of extra pawns, and the rest was easy, as they say. So Tal did end up winning this game, but only because of one mistake from his opponent, one very important mistake. And if we just go back a few moves, that mistake was this move here. After taking, black had to come here, and that would have been fine. Not just fine, but absolutely crushing. This would have been fine, like, would have been equal. But this move, trying to pin the rook, well, now black is losing. It's the only time in the game black has been losing, but now they're losing, and not just losing, they're getting annihilated. So that is what happened. It's a lesson to learn. I like the fundamentally sound approach, but keeping in mind, it's such a complex game that if you keep yourself comfortable, there's a good chance that as long as you don't go very, very wrong, there's a good chance that your opponent still will go very, very wrong, as long as you can prove it, in very complex positions. So that was game 2 in the Tal series. Tune in next time. We're going to do a little bit more tactics training and then another training game. So we'll see you then. Cheers.